Are there just some key people in your organization that seem difficult to work with? Do you struggle with getting buy-in and support from them? For many people, particularly product managers, working with a group of people we call stakeholders is probably the least favorite part of the job, but it's also what could make or break any good product work. It is also amazing how much people struggle to even define them or to understand the best ways to work with them. In this episode, I am joined again by my good friend and SVPG partner, Lea Hickman, to discuss stakeholders, who they are, why they are essential, and really talk about how we can work better with them.
Hi, Christian.
Hello, Lea. Good to see you again. I am glad to have you back. We had a really fun conversation the last time. Today, I kind of want to go into this conversation on stakeholders. It comes up a whole lot with people. This idea, we've kind of discussed product work is a team sport in one way, but like you gave me a task to build stuff, leave me alone. Who are all these other people in my business in some ways? But I really want to make sure people understand why they matter and how we work with them, because that is the real job. It is part of the job. I want to start off the back like I do with kind of defining these things first before we kind of get into them, because people make up this idea of vested interest, and I've heard that a whole lot. I've had somebody come and tell me, my spouse, very vested in the work I do every day. She asks me questions at home. I think she's a stakeholder, and so she said we should do this to the product. I mean, I've seen that on a product team. And I said, maybe we got to go deeper than vested interest, because people, I think the interesting part of this is it is the clear definition of it from our lens. But the sad part of it is everybody takes that and says, well, I am a stakeholder because I care.
But here's the thing, like anyone in the organization can have an opinion. Anyone in the organization can have a point of view. But just because they have an opinion and a point of view doesn't necessarily mean they have a vote in what you do as a product team or as part of the product organization. So when we think about stakeholders, I still think it's important as a product team, especially as a product manager, because this is a primary part of your job, keeping those stakeholders informed. There's a little bit of an art and a science to it, and it will help you in the end if you are proactive in keeping people informed about the work that you're doing, which I'm excited to talk about because I do agree with you. It's the hardest part of the product job, without a doubt.
It is such an interesting component. And, I love that you called out the vote, because I have always found that if you truly want to identify a stakeholder, it's not by the voice. Everybody should have a voice. I love that. I want everybody to care. But who truly has a vote? And in case it's not clear what the vote looks like, I always say, who can veto? Who can say, no, we're not going to do this, and we all stop? If not, they kind of have a voice. It could be a loud voice, a screaming voice, a crying voice. There are different kinds of voices in a company. But the reality is, like, if you don't have a vote, you have a voice. And I don't want to diminish voices, but I kind of want to help people understand that the true idea of vested interest is the veto power, is the ability to say no, and your product doesn't go out the door. Now, the reason I care about this is because one of the biggest frustrations of product people is like, if everybody thinks as a stakeholder, you are literally managing a whole company. The bigger the company, the more people that you have to keep happy and think you're selling ice cream to. I have to have 5,000 different flavors for everybody. But if you start to go with the vote, then you kind of realize in most of the things we do, not everybody has a vote. And so I always say the first goal is to be able to differentiate, to your point, the votes from the voices. And that will hopefully start to calm you down a little bit. Like, this is not ice cream selling. I'm not here for everybody, but I want to hear their voice in here. Now, Lea, maybe to help people in context, tell me something you've worked on and give me the lay of the land of the stakeholders that you had to engage with in that. I want to kind of visualize what they look like and how they affected your product and maybe some of the challenges in working with them.
Well, one example is, and this was a while ago when I obviously was in an operational role, there was a gap in our product portfolio, and we decided the way to fill that gap in our product portfolio was to acquire a company. And the acquisition of that company could help us in a variety of different ways. It would bring technology into the portfolio, but it would also bring talent into the portfolio. And one of the things that this company had, which we were really excited about, was it had the ability for a customer to actually quickly build an online storefront. Right. So very much similar to Shopify functionality, et cetera. And so when we were acquiring this company, there were a lot of key stakeholders in any kind of M&A business. So as a product manager, as I was putting forth the case to acquire, I had to work with the finance team, right? I needed to make sure that I had a path to profitability for this company and it needed to be accretive to the business. Second key stakeholder was legal. Because we were trying to help customers build storefronts, there's certain compliance and regulations that you have to go through. It's PCI compliance, making sure that if we store credit cards, no one has access to that credit card data, which is a really important thing with any kind of e-commerce product. So legal was another one of the stakeholders. Executive committee. Any acquisition that we had to, that we wanted to propose had to go through the CEO of the company. So the CEO was a key stakeholder and also had, by the way, veto power. And then we also needed to make sure that the other product teams were on board with our product strategy, that we, in fact, were going to bring on e-commerce. And there wasn't anywhere else in the organization that was building this from the ground up. So this is a good example of a voice, not a vote, right? So those other product teams had influence over our ability to move forward with this, but they didn't necessarily have a vote, right? So if we found the right solution, they could influence, but they couldn't veto what we were talking about. So again, that distinction that you were talking about earlier, voice versus vote, is important to call out. Now, the example that I want to hone in on was that thing that I called out on PCI compliance. So we knew that as a large public company, if you are not PCI compliant, you incur fines. There's a lot of risk if you're not PCI compliant. And the legal team said this startup that we were trying to acquire was not PCI compliant. The legal team said, absolutely not. This is a stopper for this acquisition. We cannot move forward. So we thought it was a stop sign. But when we did further diligence and further investigation, we actually found that we had 2 years to bring this startup functionality up to PCI compliance before we incurred any kind of fines or any kind of risk. So something that actually first looked like a stop sign was actually a yield sign so we could move forward. And so again, like understanding, and it's a nuance, it's not black or white, it's not a hard and fast rule. Part of the job of a product manager is to, one, identify those stakeholders, identify who has a veto, who has a voice, understand what's a pure stop sign versus a yield sign. Like it's a little bit of the art and science of stakeholder engagement. Note that I did not say management, because stakeholders are not people to manage. They're actually people to partner with.
That's right.
It's lots of learnings in that, but it's really important as a product manager or as a product leader to understand the landscape. And as a product leader, it's kind of your job to help your product managers and your product teams navigate who they need to partner with throughout the organization so that they can move the ball forward.
Oh, I love that story a lot. You know, we kind of see the job of the team is to solve problems for customers in a way that works for our business. And many people see constraints as blockers, you know, and I always tell people, look, I think you've missed the point on why product work is hard. For me, it has never been hard to do the first part, make customers happy. Like, you know, making customers are humans, you know. I've always told any company I work with, you know, buy me a private jet or a plane. I'll be happy as a customer. Like, I mean, that's easy. But it's like, why can't we do that? It's like, well, we wouldn't have money. We will make profit. It's actually the constraint, the box in which we have to solve the problem. And I always tell people, like, you call that a great example of a constraint. We need to be PCI compliant in some ways. People can just automatically say that, oh, they said no, you know, legal has blocked us. They don't want what's best for our customer, you know, in some ways. But your job is not to say, oh, we have is to solve the problem within that constraint. It's like that,
That's
we
right.
still need to solve the problem and we need something that is PCI compliant. That is you kind of call that out again. I say, man, you've got to think like winning is not checking a box. It's not, is it PCI? Sometimes you might actually have to build the PCI compliance in that sense to get something that is legal. Winning is something that is legal, that we can market, that works for our business in that way. I had a similar story when I was in the HR tech. I always like to bring my stakeholders early, and we were launching a product in a market in China, and so I found this stuff about, we can't launch it in China for some regulation that the government had around the partnership you needed to have with the product. And I went to the head of legal feeling very proud of myself, like, I have identified an issue that might make it difficult to launch it. And she's like, well, will the product work in China? I said, the product works as a global product, but in my research, I found this Chinese issue that will make it difficult for us to launch in China. And she's like, oh, okay, I think I'm going to sue the Chinese government. I'm like, whoa, I didn't ask you to do all that. She's like, because that means we'll be the first company with a product in that market if we actually win the lawsuit. It actually started to change my mindset of stakeholders in some ways because she cared about the outcome, not looking for ways to prevent us from some ways. But
yes,
that I was very humbled by that interaction. Funny enough, the lawsuit became very popular or public in Southeast Asia. Our market share in Singapore, in other markets close to China, picked up dramatically because everybody's like, what's this about? Oh, why is it not in here? I always used to be afraid of stakeholders looking for a way to stop me from doing things. And it was my first career experience early on to see a stakeholder look for ways to enable an outcome.
Well, so Christian, you said something that is very, very important, which is you were proactive with your stakeholders. And I think this is one of the most common mistakes that we see with product managers and product teams in general. They fear their stakeholders and they hold everything close to the vest and they're not proactive with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders are your partners. Right? Again, there's that vested interest. They want the outcome that you're trying to drive in the organization. So if you're proactive with them and you actually ask them for help in solving that problem, that's a completely different dynamic in the organization. And that's what makes really effective product managers. If they're proactive with those stakeholders, early and often is what I usually say to product managers. You have to be early and often, always be proactive. Never have a stakeholder try to chase you down for information. If that's the case, you've already lost. So you need to be really proactive. I'm so glad you called that out.
And you're calling out, how to be proactive. I tell people, you take a prototype. It's kind of like, if I came to you and I said, I'm thinking of building a house, what do you think should be in the house? You're going to live in the house. What do you think about this design for the house? That's great. But if I come to you, I'd be like, I built a house. Do you think it's going to work for you? I freaked out about that. It's kind of like people worry, like in discovering the testing that we do. Most stakeholders are not afraid of like, we tested with 3 customers or 5 customers or 10 customers. But you see B2C companies with millions of customers. I am about to launch this tomorrow. Like how? I don't even know what this is. The secret I tell people is like, the best way to know if something is legal in your company is if legal built it with you. The best way to know if you can market something is if marketing built it. The best way to know if it's, if you can sell it, if sales built it with you. By default, when people partner and work with you on something, they look out for their best interest. If the legal team is working with you on something, they are going to be thinking with a legal lens, like, because they are the ones that have to wake up in the middle of the night if you get a lawsuit. If marketing is working with you, they're going to be thinking, can I really market this? How is this going to disrupt my work? So I love that early and often. People always kind of say, I did a PowerPoint presentation for my stakeholders. Or, I kind of briefed them. I send them a product brief documents to read. I can't believe that they did not read it and understand what I was trying to do. Have you ever seen that? And maybe tell me why that doesn't work.
I think collaborating over artifacts is missing the point. So a lot of teams will do exactly that. And I love written narratives. I love, any kind of framing document. But the purpose of those documents is to capture the conversation, not be the conversation, right? And so this goes back to when we last talked about trust. Right? You can't build trust over a document. You build trust by actually walking someone through the why behind your doing something. And And so that one-on-one time with stakeholders, yes, it's an investment, but that investment is bringing them in early and often. And I'm not talking about hour-long PowerPoint presentations for your stakeholders. I'm talking about 15-minute whiteboard. Let me just walk you through what we're thinking about. Here's how we're going to test it. Here's our hypothesis. Having that conversation pays off exponentially later on. Right? Even with the sales, like I worked in B2B software organizations where the sooner you can bring sales in, the better off you're going to be. Now, a lot of people are scared of that because they're like, you're committing to sales that you're going to build this feature. I'm like, I'm not committing to sales that I'm going to build that feature. I'm trying to get their input. Hey, I'm thinking about this. Can I run this by a couple of customers with you? That's a very different conversation than committing to sales. So, trust your stakeholders to understand the process. If they don't understand the process of discovery, teach it to them. Explain to them what you're trying to accomplish. There's nothing scary about that. And you'll find the more you do that, and you actually have a great case study in terms of the work that you've done, in terms of building trust with sales that I absolutely love. I talk about it all the time. That is so critically important, but don't shy away from it. Embrace it. Lean forward into that kind of conversation with sales. They're your advocate. They're your partner in bringing something to market.
You've called out a couple of important dynamics, avoid the artifacts. They are not the discussion that you're having. I always say people need to see stuff because they make assumptions. You do a PowerPoint, you're like, I'm assuming it's going to have the brand colors, And then the second you launch it, they're like, this doesn't have the brand colors. How did you miss this? In some ways. And whiteboarding is kind of collaboration means solving a problem together. What you're doing with them is they start to feel like they are participating in solving the problem rather than you presenting to them kind of what you're doing or giving them an update. And you called out another piece of the one-on-one. Many people always tell me, oh, Christian, that doesn't seem effective. I need to update finance and legal and marketing and sales. I just pull them all into one glorious room and I'm just going to tell them what we're doing and get all their concerns on the table. That looks very effective. I say, my goodness, you got to avoid group meetings. There are so many interesting dynamics there. I mean, we could probably spend a whole episode talking about it, but I'm like, what about like the hippo effect? You're in a meeting, the CEO is there, and the CEO says, that is a stupid idea. Who is the next person to speak up in that meeting? And if they speak up, what do they say? Yes, I agree with you, CEO. That is a stupid idea. Everybody just agrees with that. Or, the smartest person in the room or the person that is trying to impress their boss. Let me ask smart question so that they can think that I'm paying attention in this meeting. You know what? The Star Wars effect, I always call that one, where maybe a finance person will ask a legal question. And then legal is like, how dare you ask a question about my department? I'm now going to ask a finance question. And in your meeting just looks like people are shooting each other like, pew, pew. You called out a very important technique. I can't even stress that to people. I say, look, what you do is a one-on-one. You go and you kind of describe it, a product walkthrough. You kind of say, hey, Lea, we're trying to build, you're the head of legal. Do you see anything that concerns you from a legal standpoint? I know it sounds crazy, people, but I have not seen any more effective way to collaborate with a stakeholder than a one-on-one. Because, all your trust dynamics comes out there, your relationship building comes out there, and I think the last point you called out was sales. Man, sales. That's always a fun one for people because I think people fail to understand the role of sales because, most product people, we create value. Your job is to sell. Go sell in some ways. Why are you up in my business? And I have to think to people like, do you know how salespeople get paid? Their whole family depends on something called commission or something. If they don't sell, they don't eat. And I tell people we have a misalignment of goals. If you're missing the point with what the importance of sales in that world. And understandably, great products make sales easy if you do great products. But in B2B environment, there are so many nuances because a salesperson brings or extends their relationships, the trust that somebody has given them to the company and to your product. And I always tell people, we lose sight of the importance of collaborating with sales in the work we do because our products are experienced in the totality of it, meaning like the experience somebody has with a salesperson can actually affect what your product is. I have a perfect product. Nobody buys it. It's like people are not even selling what you thought you built, in some ways. And it is actually your job as a product team to solve for
That's right.
how people experience the value you've created. And so collaborating with sales, I always, it's not an option. You have to solve for the constraints of how do we sell this? How do we talk about this? What do customers say into this? And you have to do the same mindset. You kind of call that, teach them discovery. It builds trust because you're like, oh, you're trying to learn. You're trying to understand the best way to do this. You're trying to make my job easier to sell. Not that you have the perfect answer and you're trying to force it down my throat. So I love that. Okay. Now, one of the ways we experience stakeholders, Lea, is through stakeholder-driven roadmaps. Somehow, the only way we heard about marketing is from a list of projects and features that they have found their way to get into a list that comes to our table. And that is often our first experience, like, who wants this? Well, marketing says we should do this. And, sales, it came from sales. How do you manage that in some ways? Because all of a sudden, it's not a relationship, it's not a collaboration. It kind of feels outside in, top down. How do you go about navigating an environment? I have stakeholder-driven roadmaps. My stakeholders, the only collaboration I have with them is they told me what to do on a piece of paper.
So I fundamentally believe that ideas can come from anywhere inside or outside the organization. So with that mindset, that means that stakeholders are always going to have input and have ideas in terms of what we should build. However, just because they have ideas doesn't mean that it's the right thing to build or even the right problem to solve, but it's a great input of ideas. And so you still, as a product team, you need to test those ideas that come in. You cannot take them at face value. You still have to go through some discovery process. So we all know that when we're mitigating risk as part of discovery, we think about value. Will they use it? Will they buy it? Usability risk. Can they use it? Business viability. Will it work for the business? And technical feasibility. Can we build it? And a stakeholder typically doesn't think that way, right? They think more, and this is overgeneralization, but if I'm a sales rep, I met with a customer, the customer said they want X, I'm going to go back to the product team and say, give me X because the customer won't buy unless you deliver X. Right? That is a pure definition of a stakeholder-driven roadmap. I need to sell the product. I can't sell it unless I have that capability.
Yes.
That assumes that there's more than one customer who needs that capability to solve their particular problem. You still have to test that. And I think the more you can work with your stakeholders to help them understand, you are trying to build products that work for customers and work for the business based on evidence that you have from a value perspective and a viability perspective. That's a very different conversation than just taking that feature idea, implementing it, and doing it at face value. I actually worked with this one organization that they had a roadmap. And at the end of the year, they delivered absolutely everything that was on that roadmap. So from a development perspective or a team perspective, check the box on all the things. They committed to delivering, they delivered everything. However, none of the things that they delivered moved the needle on the business whatsoever. Because from a product leadership perspective, no one tied the work to be done back to the results that they were trying to achieve for the business. Huge disconnect. Were the stakeholders happy that they delivered everything on the roadmap? I would guess not. Because, the business did not accomplish anything that it was trying to accomplish. And that's the danger of state-driven roadmaps. The team views success as delivering the feature, not achieving the results that we're trying to achieve. So that shared definition of success is really, really important. So aligning on that shared definition of success with the stakeholders. Let the stakeholders know your objective. What is the problem that the team is tasked to solve? That's why I'm a big fan of not just feature roadmaps, but objective-based roadmaps, because that is aligning, again, on the definition of success, which is articulated in our objectives and our key results, which is critical. Share that with the stakeholders.
Oh, I love that. You're calling out, even in some ways, evidence beats opinions. And most of the ideas that you might see are just an opinion of what somebody thinks will solve the problem. It's kind of like a customer thinks, if I have this, it should do this. If you build this, salespeople are believing if you build this for my customer, they will give me back money in return, which will help me get my commission and feed my children. And I want people to understand, that's the heart of what they're trying to communicate to you. Now, you have to ask them what they really want is to win a deal. by solving a problem for a customer and to get their commission. These are the outcomes in the end. That's what good results look like. You just described the situation. They built all these things. They probably didn't win the deal, didn't grow their business, and then they're going to add more things. Maybe you didn't build it the right way. I need more things in here.
That's right.
So you're calling out this particular technique of you need to understand the problem they are really trying to solve. It's a great idea. Most people have great ideas, and so you kind of say, why do we really want to do this? Oh, you're struggling to close a deal. Why? Customer is missing. What's the customer trying to accomplish? Is there a better way? So you have to test. You have to gather evidence that if I do this, it will actually get us the results we want. And I think that is a very important thing to do. People say, well, Christian, no matter how you try that, you haven't met our CEO or our leader. They do the super poop, where they just come in and they just dump it on us and then they just walk away. I don't even tell executives, one of my favorite techniques is actually to take them out on discovery with me. Or a salesperson on discovery. If a salesperson is like, this is what we want. I say, you know what? I want to make sure we succeed when we do it. Let's go talk to that customer. Now, sometimes I might even know that the customer doesn't really even want something. I might find that I need to show them how we go learn, how we test, because then they need to trust that the things we do come from some evidence, come from some experimentation, but they don't know what we're going to do. They just expect, I tell you, you're going to do it, right? But I'm saying, I want to do it well, so I'm going to validate and test it. I take my executives all the times to meet customers, and I go with them because they start to see the process or the way we work to come up with evidence. Mm-hmm. And so when somebody says no, they see us we are prototyping like we're right, we're testing like we're wrong. We're like, no, tell me why you really want this. Tell me what you... And so what it does is it starts to increase the trust of these people use data. They use evidence to make their decisions. So, maybe I should just feed them. I think some customers have then tell them what to do. Most people have no clue. And I think the last point is many people don't know how valuable or maybe not so valuable their ideas may be. Meaning, I've never met an executive or a stakeholder that says, oh, I have an idea that will make us $1 million. And you tell them, my team is working on something that will make us $10 million. And you say, no, do my $1 million first. Most people don't know that there's something more important, something that could be more valuable. And so I think good stakeholder collaboration requires us not just to collaborate, but to get good at communicating where things are, what problems we're solving, what we think. Because if they can see oh, you know what, I have a great idea, but what they are working on, my goodness, if they deliver that, they have some great evidence of results. This is just an idea. And I tell people, please don't get it wrong. If you don't have an idea that is probably better than your stakeholders, you should probably go test that one. I mean, what are you trying to prove? It didn't come from me, so we're not going to do it.
Well, you call out a really important thing, which is it's a really dangerous thing for the product team or the product manager to think that they are the only source of ideas. So I always tell my product managers that when a stakeholder comes to them with an idea, employ the rule of improv. And the rule of improv, as everyone knows, is yes and. So, Christian, if you come to me with a great idea or even a mediocre idea, even a bad idea, and you say, I think we should build X, I'm going to say, oh, yes, tell me more about that. Tell me more. Yes, and I would like to know why do you think we need to build that? So it's kind of like a mashup between the 5 whys and the rule of improv. But use it as an opportunity to have a quick conversation with the stakeholder. If nothing else, you're going to learn why they think it's such a great idea. And you might even choose to do discovery on it and to find out more and to actually test it with customers. But who cares where the idea comes from? If it's something that's worthy of pursuing, that's great.
I love that technique a lot, kind of the rule of improv and the 5 whys. Man, yeah, this has always been fun. I love these conversations. I think we can do them for hours. As usual, I am so grateful for the gift of your time today and for really spending time talking about these topics and going deep on them. I look forward to more conversations and more episodes on good topics. Thank you again, Lea, for another wonderful episode.
Always a pleasure spending time with you.
Want to learn more? Until next time, please check out svpg.com, sign up for our newsletter that Maddie Kagan puts out, join us for one of our workshops near you, and get access to all of the articles and content we put out. And thank you to everyone for joining us. Until next time, have a good day.
A quick disclaimer, while this podcast is named Product Therapy, it is not hosted by licensed therapists or mental health professionals, and it is in no way a substitute for professional mental health services. We recognize the importance of mental well-being and encourage anyone facing personal difficulties to seek support from qualified professionals. See www.findahelpline.com.